Okay, we'll get started. Welcome everybody to the October 13th, 2025 regular city council meeting. I'd like to ask our city clerk to please call the roll.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Here.
Councillor Runyon.
Here.
Councillor Randall.
Here.
Councillor Richardson.
Here.
Councillor Ring is absent. Mayor Mays.
Present. Item 3 is Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to ask Councilman Scott Randall to please lead us in the pledge.
Please stand and join me if you're able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilor Randall. Item 4 is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I have a quick question, then I'd be happy to make a motion. I do have a question on one of the consent agenda items. Remind me, are we allowed to do question and answer and still have something on the consent, or does it need to be pulled and discussed separately?
Is there a...
You have to pull it if you want to discuss it separately.
Well,
You want to pull it and discuss it with the intent of possibly
it's just for my own understanding.
well, if it's that, just ask it during the consent agenda.
Very good. In that case, I would be happy to make a motion to approve the agenda.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
It's been moved by Councilor Richardson and seconded by Councilor Randall to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 5 is audience participation. During this portion of the meeting, anyone may speak on any subject which does not later appear on the agenda. Interested citizens are required to sign up in advance to be recognized. Up to 3 minutes per person will be allowed. Citizens are encouraged to ask questions with the understanding that the city can either answer the question tonight or refer that question to the appropriate staff member who will get back to you within a reasonable amount of time. If a response by the city is requested and the response is not immediately provided, the speaker will be referred to the city manager for further action. Tonight we have 2 people signed up. First, Leslie Naramore from the Mid-Columbia Community Action Council.
Good evening. I'm Leslie Naramore. I'm the Executive Director of Mid-Columbia Community Action Council, and I'm here today to address comments that were made at the end of the last City Council meeting by members of the council. It is not my intent to start any sort of back and forth with the city or be disrespectful, but because the comments were made in public and were erroneous, I feel that my response should be public as well. I will add that I am profoundly disappointed that the conversation in question took place after I left the room, as I had attended the first part of that meeting. The council asked what my 30 staff are doing. Let me tell you, MCAC staff work tirelessly to support our most vulnerable community members throughout our 3-county area, which includes all of Hood River, Wasco, and Sherman counties. Our staff are a group of dedicated individuals who do everything from running our current shelter programs to providing wraparound case management to rehousing 23 families who lost their home in the Rowena fire to delivering mattresses to Rowena fire survivors who couldn't pick up the mattresses themselves. They are stretched thin, but every day they come to work and they get things done in spite of a lack of resources, funding, and sometimes community support. They do this because it is the right thing to do. I would also like to remind the council that the problems at hand are a community problem to solve and not just an MCAC problem. These problems are multifaceted, and it will take all of us working together to solve them. I hope that MCAC can count on the city to be a partner in the work going forward as you have in the past. As I have previously mentioned when I was here a few weeks ago giving a presentation, In the last few years, MCAC has undergone a tremendous amount of change. We're offering more services, more shelter beds, and yes, we do have more staff, and that's still not enough. We still don't have the capacity or the funds to shelter or house everyone who needs a hand up, and we won't be able to get there by ourselves. On the one hand, I am really thankful that the city is talking about these issues because that at least means that you have awareness. But on the other hand, I'm extremely disappointed that you don't understand how hard my staff work. Word travels really fast. My staff heard your remarks and they found them very disheartening. This is grueling stuff, and you can't understand it unless you are in the trenches. We do not take our work lightly. I would like to close by inviting members of the council to come on site and spend a day in the life of what both my clients and my staff experience. I would like to invite you to get in the trenches with us. I would also like to invite the council and the community to participate in our upcoming Housing Stabilization Summit, which will be held November 6th at the Dalles Civic Auditorium. I hope that I will see some of you there.
Thank you. Sarah Kellens.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Kellens and I work at Mid-Columbia Community Action Council. I'd like to share some highlights from our work, the work our staff team is engaged in every day. Here are some key outcomes from our most recent annual report that covers fiscal year 23-24, and I'll also leave these for you to review. During that year, we served over 3,000 people across our service area. Of those, the majority received utilities assistance, which helps people struggling to pay their household bills stay stably housed with the lights and power on. Within our housing programs, we supported 243 people to reach successful housing outcomes. What does a successful housing outcome mean in the life of an individual or family? It means that 175 community members at risk of eviction did not lose their housing, and that 68 community members transitioned from houselessness into long-term housing placements. Of those 68 people, 40 of them were living with disabilities. And of the 175 community members who avoided eviction, 79% of them were children and youth. These outcomes would not be possible without partnership. In fiscal year 23-24, we partnered with 90 local landlords to provide eviction prevention and rapid rehousing supports. We also partnered with volunteers from the community who provided 579 hours of service with a special focus on supporting our shelter programs. I'd also like to share some key outcomes and community impacts from our work this year. We recently finalized our 25 to 30 strategic plan. There's a QR code on the front where you can view the whole plan online if you're interested. And this strategic plan focuses on stability after a period of growth. So far this year, our housing and shelter staff have supported 23 people to transition from the annex into long-term housing placements. Our team has also stepped up to provide additional services in the aftermath of the Rowena fire. Our housing case managers are currently working with 26 households displaced by the fire and have supported 23 of those to stabilize in new long-term placements. These outcomes, again, are possible only through partnership, including with 13 new landlord partners who stepped up to work with us in the aftermath of the fire. I hope you will take 5 minutes sometime this week to watch this short film called Local Landlords Change Lives. It tells the true story of one landlord partnership and the transformation stable housing made in one person's life right here in the Dalles. Our MCAC staff team is working hard each and every day. We know that the work of preventing and ending homelessness is possible only through partnership. and we hope you will continue to partner with us in that work.
Thank you. Okay. Was there anybody that was going to speak regarding item 9A on the agenda? Okay, 9A, you understand what that's all about, right? Okay. Well, we'll explain it when it comes up for the agenda, but if you're not here to discuss that particular issue, now might be the time when you want to address the city council. So. Okay. Item 6, city manager's report. Mr. Klebs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Several items this evening. There was a Special Districts Association financing presentation at the Port of the Dalles meeting last week that I attended, which was very informative. And I want to give a special thanks to the Port for organizing that presentation. We received a Transportation Growth Management grant for West Side area planning. It's very just preliminary information at this point, but more to come as that effort moves forward. The Chenoweth Housing Development, which I think many of you are aware of, on the west side of town has been approved, and they plan on submitting for their building permit packet in early 2026. We're planning an informational session for several upcoming construction projects that are taking place next year. This includes the First and Weber project, First Street streetscaping, and the Federal Street Plaza. We're going to organize that informational session right here in the City Council chambers on October 30th. We're hoping to convey information to downtown business owners and property owners and the general public at large about these construction projects and some of the impacts that we will see from them. There will be traffic impacts, parking impacts, traffic flow, railroad crossing impacts. So we want to get this information out there. We've been communicating with some of our partners and have been doing some outreach even to the cruise ship line that we have down there at the marine terminal. The city attorney and I are working on some correspondence with the US EPA Portland Harbor team to establish more direct communication with them regarding the proposed transport of Portland Harbor remedial waste to the Wasco County landfill. We've gotten a couple inquiries on this item from different constituents. There was a meeting that I was unable to attend, but I got the information from that I shared with council back in late September. And we just want to make sure that we're in communication with them and we're having some correspondence about what their plans are, what some of the impacts may be, and what action we might consider taking, depending on how that kind of shakes out. So I wanted to apprise you of that. And finally, there's a ribbon cutting for the new water improvements. These are the improvements built and paid for by Google and transferred into city ownership. And this is on October 22nd, next week. I believe you've all received the invite and have the logistics, but if you don't, please let me know. And with that, that's my report.
Thank you very much.
No, it's not. I always do that. Sorry. I'm also very happy to introduce Brita Meyer, who is in the back row. Go ahead and stand up. She is our new finance director, and today is her first day.
Oh.
We are very happy to have you aboard. And that's my report. Thank you.
She's off to a good start. She said some nice things about Mr. McLaughlin.
Oh, gee.
She went to school and her parents had Mr. McLaughlin too. I think that's something that everyone should understand. Okay. City council reports. We'll start with the just mentioned Councilor Tim McLaughlin.
Mayor Mays. On Wednesday, September 24th, I stopped by First and Union Street to observe the food delivery to the homeless on First and Washington. Teresa and Linda were there, and I observed a young man helping to put away. And after that was all through, I did have a chance to talk to the young man. I found out that he was the person that was camped underneath the underpass. And after the discussion, I asked him if he would consider, when the boats arrive, finding another place so that it doesn't obstruct people transferring from the boat to the city. And he understood, and the next day he was gone. and very, very pleasant conversation. On Friday, September 26th, I did go back and I met with Teresa and Linda, and we went to various locations within the Dalles, and we looked at 5 possible locations to look at as a possible delivery site for the food distribution. And we drove around town, and at that point, they were considering that, and I see they're here tonight, and maybe we can get an update on what you've decided to do. My objective is to keep our city safe and secure, and basically keep it where people can live, all citizens and including the homeless. So that's my goal. That's the report on that for you. LOC conference last week, I did attend with the mayor and 2 council persons. It was a 3-day conference. And then the airport meeting I want to bring up is that the business park is underway. The runway has been taken out. There are T hangars that are starting very soon, correct?
Private development is underway and the public development.
Perfect. And I noticed the terminal improvements on the outside and cleaning up the area, and thank you very much for that. And then I did notice that the Airbus, which were 3 planes that were housed at the Dalles Airport, which it was a godsend this season because those planes prevented the destruction of a lot of houses, of people, and they were invaluable, and we're very pleased to host them here at our regional airport. And I believe that they're looking forward to coming back in the future. Excellent. So that's my report for this meeting.
Thank you. Councilor Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last weekend, as Councilor McLaughlin mentioned, I attended the League of Oregon Cities annual conference. And then on the 7th, I had a brief meeting with the local public safety coordinating committee. And that's it.
Councilor Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Mays. Very briefly, a conversation with Jake and Josh last week, looking at our urban renewal projects and upcoming meeting next week. I'll report back at our next council meeting about some developments there. And also, I guess I should note that Jake Anderson, our EDO, will be taking on the role of agency manager. And I'm confident he will do a first-rate job there. Had a downtown walking meeting with our city manager, discussing various bits and projects and programs. And I would like to say just for myself that though there's some ongoing conversations about some tough subjects, I do appreciate Ms. Naramore, yourself and your staff in helping so many of our neighbors who find themselves in sort of tough straits forestall or find an alternate path besides eviction and also getting back into some permanent housing. I think that's really important work. The end.
The end. Councilor Runyon.
Yes, also attended the League of Oregon Cities Conference, went to a number of different meetings, but with particular emphasis, I went to the one that was put on by Washington County and City of Beaverton on homelessness issues in their county, and things they're doing to help with that, including park safely zones for those that live in their cars. Churches were involved in that, as well as one city-owned property or a county-owned property. Today, Mid-Columbia Veterans Memorial Committee that I just came from before I got here.
Thank you. As far as my report goes, the only thing I'm going to mention is the aforementioned League of Oregon Cities Conference in Portland. And I'm proud to say that the city received an award for excellence in best practices. Apparently, we were given we had some very good experience with our workers' comp claims and other claims. And our insurance company, the City County Insurance Services, presented the city with an award for that. The award goes to 3 different cities, one small city, one medium city, and one large. We are in the medium city category. And I was very proud to get up in front of a lot of people and accept this award. And I will now give this to the city manager and along with kudos for a job well done. So. Okay. Moving on to the consent agenda, items of a routine and non-controversial nature are placed on the consent agenda to allow the city council to spend its time and energy on the more important items and issues. Any councilor may request an item be pulled from the consent agenda and be considered separately. Items pulled from the consent agenda will be placed on the agenda at the end of the action items section. Tonight, we have 9, it might be a record, 9 items on the consent agenda. First is the approval of the September 22nd City Council meeting minutes. Secondly, approval of the August 21st joint meeting between the Planning Commission and the City Council. Third is a resolution concurring with my appointment of Victor Johnson to the Traffic Safety Commission and Melissa Alvarado to the Plan Commission. Fourth is authorization to declare a surplus of tasers. Fifth is award of a contract for the sludge removal program. 6 is authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement with Klickitat County for the airport's aviation hangar expansion project. 7th is a resolution authorizing a loan to the airport fund for the aviation hangar expansion project. 8th is a resolution establishing a mandatory pre-qualification program for public improvement contracts. And finally, a resolution directing the city attorney to issue subpoenas for the production of records to ensure compliance with and enforcement of our municipal code, Chapter 8. I assume that is, after looking at that, is related to the collection of transient rental tax. And with that, I believe Councilor Richardson has a question.
Thank you, Mayor Mays. My question for staff is item G, the interfund loan to the airport fund for the hangar project. It may well have been in the paperwork, but I missed it. Can you connect the dots for me on how that gets repaid?
So I can certainly answer that question. Our airport manager is in the audience too, to fill in any gaps that I may have. But the T hangar project, there are 2 T hangars with approximately, I think, 20 T hangar units, so 20 aircraft.
Yep.
And each of those units has a certain amount of rent, and that increase in revenue will be used to pay off the loan.
See how easy that was. Thank you so much.
Anything to add?
You nailed it. Exactly it.
Thanks for coming anyway, Jeff. You know, sometimes I glossed over item C on the consent agenda. You know, I think one of the most important things that I do as the mayor is I make appointments to all the various committees and commissions. And I think I counted about a month ago, I probably made about over 60 different appointments to our committees and commissions. Some of the people in the audience I know have previously served on these. But I would like to recognize Melissa Alvarado, who I just appointed to the Plan Commission, who's attending tonight, and I'd like her to stand and be recognized, and we thank her for her interest and her public service. Okay. Item 9. Wait, we need a motion, don't we? Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
McLaughlin will second.
It's been moved by Councilor Randall and seconded by Councilor McLaughlin to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, now we're at item 9A. It's an ordinance amending our municipal code regarding public nuisances. Mr. Klebs, our city attorney, Mr. Jonathan Kara, will present the staff report.
Thank you very much, Mayor Mays. I have our chief of police in the back who's here to answer any questions as well. And as council knows, this ordinance is very police heavy. Despite not being a criminal ordinance, it is an interesting overlap of the city's civil authorities and the criminal world. So as a refresher, the city's public nuisance ordinance was adopted in 1998 with the intent to help keep our community safe, clean, and livable. Our current code has been with us for many years, but it was built around some older processes, and some of them don't clearly address some of the dynamics that the city is currently facing. And so this update, tonight's General Ordinance 25-1420, is intended to keep the same overall goal, which is addressing problems at their source while giving the city and property owners some clearer tools and more transparent processes. The city's Municipal Code Chapter 5.12 is a tool that was used by the city to, in situations when people tied to a property have committed certain offenses a certain number of times a year. Currently, our code says 3 or more times per year within a 12-month period on a piece of real property in the city's limits or within 300 feet. Currently, our code relies on arrests or citations to prove those incidents. And so the process typically goes after the police chief receives that information, sort of suggesting a pattern of behavior. The city police would send a notice to the property owner that would raise those concerns and ask what the plan is to stop those kinds of events from happening, and if they need any help preventing them from happening, and effectively saying the community needs these things to stop happening, and effectively giving rise to a nuisance over time. Under our current code, it's 3 criminal events that are listed in the very first part. It's not all crimes, and it's not all of them are crimes, really. Some of them are just offenses. 3 or more in a 12-month period. And so when we looked at this, coming off the heels of some litigation that the city was involved in last year, looking at it with the intent of seeing what could have been better in that litigation and what made more sense. I think one of the first things naively that came to mind were just expanding the list of offenses. And so that didn't really resonate with any of the people that were involved in drafting this, which was myself, the city manager, the police chief, the mayor, our police captain. And we wanted to look at this holistically. And so while yes, and I'll get to that in a second about what the specific changes are, the list of offenses that could potentially qualify as an incident that would give rise to this ordinance has expanded. The clock for which those events have to have occurred on the property or within 300 feet of the property has been cut in half. And so the intent there is to broaden the scope, but to narrow the focus. And so a red line is available on your packet starting on page 86, if that's something that council might find helpful to go over. But I just wanted to go over the 8 or so key changes, and we can go down the list one at a time. I'm happy to take questions from anybody at the council as we go, or we can wait till the end. But to summarize these 8 main changes, we have number 1, accuracy. It has included a measurement for the current ordinance's 300-foot rule. We wanted to define that with particularity. And so now it's 300 feet measured from the boundary line of the real property. And we also establish with more clarity who specifically is responsible for a property. And that's reflected in the definition of a person in charge in the very first section of the ordinance. The second change is, as I mentioned, expanding how an incident can be proven just beyond arrests and citations, which was another focus of the task force or work group that went into working on this ordinance. Currently, our ordinance relies on arrests and citations to establish whether an incident has occurred for purposes of establishing a pattern of behavior. And so the proposed change tonight would expand on that a bit by saying we can count incidents if they're otherwise meeting the criteria. And if they can be proven beyond just arrests and citations, it allows reliable evidence like police reports or video or inspection findings to be considered even when the conduct does not result in an arrest or a citation, but can otherwise be proven. And again, when I say proven here, I don't mean proven like in the criminal context where it's beyond a reasonable doubt, but for the purposes of this civil ordinance, the standard is more likely than not, which is the legal way of saying it is by a preponderance of the evidence. And so I give an example on the staff report, page 75 of your packet. For example, if the police department receives security footage from a local business of a person urinating in public late in the evening, the city can use that as evidence establishing the qualifying incident, even if there were no police officers at the scene of that offense during that evening. They can use things like that police report or that security footage to be considered. Number 3 would be something that I mentioned earlier in this, broadening the scope while also shortening the timeline. The ordinance expands the list of qualifying offenses. I believe it doubles it. And that list is section 5.12.020. The red line for all of those changes is on page 87 of your packet to see which offenses have been included. And as a result of doubling the types of offenses that would qualify as incidents, we felt that it made a whole lot more sense to shorten the look-back period that the city would have available from 12 months to 6 months. And so put another way, isolated incidents that have been spread over a year, let's say taking the calendar year, January 1st to December 31st, having an incident in January and another one in June and another one in December hardly feels like a pattern. And so not that I think that the city would enforce against a property or a property owner for that. I think it makes a very sensible concession to, if we're going to be doubling the types of offenses or the numbers of offenses that would give rise to a public nuisance claim, that we would also shorten the time period. And so as proposed, it would be 6 months instead of 12, which should resolve any concerns that the city could make an argument that a pattern would be arising over something that's so attenuated as opposed to clustered in a shortened amount of time. Number 4 talks about the safe harbor. And so this is actually a change. The city manager and I were just having a conversation about this right before this meeting. And so this is actually a change that I'm going to be proposing here tonight. Earlier, after this ordinance was published for the packet, I had a chance to connect and review this proposed ordinance with the Wasco County District Attorney. Again, after this draft was published, and coming out of that meeting, it became clear to me and to the district attorney that she would support changing a provision of our proposed ordinance to broaden some protections of this safe harbor provision in support of victims of domestic violence and related crimes by avoiding some disincentives for them for contacting 911 or otherwise seeking law enforcement assistance. And so my proposed revision, Mr. Mayor, to our ordinance deals specifically, and I'll read this into the record, at section 5.12.030B. Again, reflecting some changes recommended by the Wasco County District Attorney. For subpart 1, we'd be revising that provision as now having as the default to not count occurrences against a property if they were first reported to law enforcement by the person in charge, unless the city shows that a plan was in effect and it wasn't being followed. And so what that sounds like is, I'll say it exactly as I would intend on making this change, which is section B, safe harbor, notwithstanding any other provision of this chapter, an occurrence, again, I'll start over, section 5.12.030B, safe harbor, notwithstanding any other provision of this chapter, an occurrence reported by the person in charge or a third party acting on behalf of the person in charge shall not, which is an addition, shall not count towards establishing a pattern of behavior as a qualifying incident unless the city can show by a preponderance of the evidence that a city-approved abatement plan addressing the relevant risks was in effect at the time and the person in charge was not in substantial compliance with that plan and with reasonable site management measures, and then the list of staffing, training, trespass authority, lighting, and cameras. Again, the intent behind that change is to maximize victim protection. And so I can stop there just to make sure that this point is really clear. Staff is revising its recommendation. It would be adopting this ordinance as amended with that modification, as recommended by the Wasco County District Attorney and your city attorney, to optimize support for victims, especially victims of domestic violence and related offenses.
And you have every intention of going through and finishing items 5 through 8,
Yeah.
correct? Yeah.
Yes, but might as well stop there. I feel like I've been talking a while and want to make sure everybody's with me. I know it could be kind of dry, but yeah.
Well, could you be more specific as to what this amendment would do for a victim of domestic violence specifically?
Yeah. So again, the intent behind this change to 51230B, looking at what I had originally drafted and what this ordinance said when it was published, the default was that if a person in charge of a property was the person to call 911, the default was that it would still count as a qualifying incident for purposes of establishing the pattern if certain criteria were met, or unless they could show that certain criteria were met. And so after speaking with the Wasco County District Attorney, she made a great point that puts victims of domestic violence specifically in a weird spot, because now they're in a position, even though this is not a criminal context, but now they're in a position of, if they'd like this incident to count, of proving that something happened and further engaging with police and having that direct contact. And oftentimes, as the district attorney herself put it earlier today, those victims oftentimes have very difficult time dealing with coordinating their own well-being and their own safety, let alone involving themselves in the world of police and police business. And so this change and the intent behind this change, and I agree with the district attorney on all of this, frankly, is to maximize victim protection, which these revisions accomplish by mitigating unintended collateral consequences of such reporting, like potential retaliatory evictions or other enforcement actions that now this victim of domestic violence would have to re-endure. And it also has the benefit of encouraging responsible property owners who are trying their best to avoid these problems from arising to begin with, by encouraging them to be vigilant and responsive to qualifying incidents before they become qualifying incidents. So by working closely with our police department, by being the first reporters to resolve issues in partnership with the city, the idea behind this change would be that they can still count as qualifying incidences if the city shows that there was a plan in place and that they just weren't meeting the plan, and the burden would be on the city. But having the default, as the district attorney mentioned it, having the default be placed on potentially a victim, especially potentially a victim of domestic violence, it seems to be an unintended consequence of the way that this ordinance was drafted, and I actually agree. And so again, the change here would be for Section B, to change B1, as I mentioned it earlier, the burden for establishing a qualifying incident in this situation would be on the city to show by a preponderance of the evidence that there was a plan in place and that this happened despite that plan because the person who was in charge wasn't following through with reasonable site mitigation measures. But otherwise, it creates a safe harbor for victims of crime, so that they don't have to worry about, in addition to being a victim of crime, now they could potentially be evicted for having a nuisance action filed against the property. And so it's very much intended in that regard. Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody on the council have any questions regarding item 4 before we move on? Okay. Why don't you go ahead?
Yep. And then the other change to Section B would be deleting number 2. It sort of goes in line with that. So again, number 1 would be, as I read it earlier, number 2 would just be deleted. And again, that would be my recommendation for the city council, which after speaking with the DA, she would now support the council's adoption of this ordinance after making those changes. Okay. Number 5, process improvements. We just wanted to enhance some of our notice requirements in our current ordinance, which seemed like they could be better. And so we wanted to allow some, valid service in situations where it mattered to have valid service as opposed to doing everything by mail. And so that's very much an administrative change in number 5. Number 6, we wanted to offer a straightforward abatement plan option for responsible owners if they want to adopt it quickly. This is just very much a process improvement as they work through establishing an abatement plan with our chief of police. It basically gets us to a position of agreeing on a course of action and a lot faster of a timeline than our ordinance currently goes through. Those changes are all detailed in the service section on page 90 in red line. Number 7, one of the hallmarks of our ordinance, like all other types of public nuisance ordinances across the country, is authorizing the city to seek and a court to order a property's closure. And so this is number 7, fair remedies. The ordinance gives the court, and the court by default here is the Wasco County Circuit Court. It gives the court a targeted tool to stop the specific activity that causes problems on a property without always closing the whole property. And that targeted option should help match the appropriate remedy to any given situation. And so I give an example here in the staff report on page 75. If a bar is located on the ground floor, for example, of a mixed-use development, and that bar is responsible for establishing a pattern of behavior that gives rise to a nuisance under this code, the court would now have the ability to simply order the bar closed without also closing the residential area above it. Under our current ordinance, it's not clear that that is available. It certainly doesn't read that way at all, actually. In fact, if that were to happen today and the city were to seek that closure, it doesn't seem like the court would have any discretion. They must close the whole building. And these updates also require a quick court review after any emergency closure in cases where the city would be seeking a temporary restraining order to mitigate, irreparable harm to a community or to our community as a result of this. In those kinds of situations, this ordinance also gives the court the ability to have a rapid turnaround. Number 8. We wanted to enhance our transparency, but also be sure that we had firm consequences for bad behavior. The ordinance keeps the option to close a property when needed, and it sets clear time ranges for all closures, which gives property owners predictability and gives the city predictability, helps the public understand what to expect in serious cases. But there's also a reasonable cap on the amount of civil penalties in a single case so that there's no allegations or really any sort of windfall here for the city. It caps total penalties in every case in the court's discretion. Under our current ordinance, we don't have such a cap, and it would be an unlimited penalty in the court's discretion. And so there's a lot of changes that it sounds like a lot, but in reality, they're administrative mostly. The ones that impact the public the most, I would say, would be the expansion of the list of nuisance offenses, the shortening of the time period, which is a benefit to any property owner, adding in the safe harbor provision as modified, protects victims of domestic violence and any other victims, and encourages property owners to coordinate with our police department and law enforcement without disincentivizing them, which is a protection that our ordinance currently does not have. Frankly, the rest of this is mostly administrative. And it also limits the city's ability to request an entire property be closed. Instead, a court would now have the authority, if we were to adjudicate a claim like this, to simply close the bar, not the whole building with the homes above it, to use that example. But put another way, the city would have the authority to request a court to close a place, not just a property, if that makes sense. So,
Okay, what I'd like to do is have, open it up for questions from the city council, not deliberation, just questions. And then after you guys ask your questions, we'll open it up to a public comment. And then after that, we'll get back to the city council and have them deliberate on where we go from here with this particular ordinance. So any questions for the city attorney?
Not a question so much as it's a big improvement where you have multiple use buildings and we're seeming to have more of those in our community. And if the business is doing something that causes this to be enforced, that the apartments or whatever that they have above may not necessarily be affected.
absolutely.
Okay.
And under our
Thank
current
you.
ordinance, we wouldn't be able to have that fine tooth comb. We would just have the authority to request the entire property be closed, tenants and all. So that's right.
Other questions? Councilor Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor Mays. I would like to say to staff, I appreciate what appears to be a thoughtful and well-balanced set of amendments, in my opinion, or updates or revisions, whatever you want to call it. It's not just a hammer, it's not like just a bigger hammer on property owners. It's a thoughtful approach that sort of has some give and take. So I appreciate that. I guess one question I have is, in brief, what problem does this ordinance revision address, in your opinion? Why take the time and go through and bring this set of thoughtful, well-balanced revisions?
I think it's part of the city manager or the police chief, of course, might have different opinions in their roles, administration and law enforcement. But aside from the benefits given that I presented here on just the administrative efficiencies, and from the police chief side, the law enforcement improvements, from the legal side, the city used this ordinance a few years ago to navigate the situation with St. Vincent de Paul Society of the Dalles on Pentland Street. And I believe we sort of dusted off an old record when we pulled that one out. And, it was in existence since 1998. And so for the time, I'm sure it was a very state-of-the-art ordinance. And, coming into 2022 and 2023 when we were using it, I think at least I, as the city attorney at the time, I wish it said things that were different, because it seemed more like a hammer to a nail kind of a situation where I found myself wanting for the city a bit more flexibility. And again, that doesn't just mean carte blanche. It meant like a balanced flexibility that would have those ideas competing of public safety and also property rights. And that's the fine line that nuisance laws walk. These kinds of ordinances really became popular in the early 1900s, turn of the century, coming from the East Coast. They were primarily designed to regulate opium dens and bars and places that had of ill repute, as some of the old books say. And so they're effectively just a tool for cities to ensure that people that are opening themselves up to do business with the public or to invite the public onto their property for something, they have a responsibility. It's not a burdensome responsibility, but it's certainly a responsibility that the issues that come along with that are being responsibly managed. And so when we finished that litigation with St. Vincent de Paul here in the Dalles, we wanted to sort of take a deep breath and take a look at our ordinance to see, in case this has to happen again in the next 20 or 30 years, well, let's use this opportunity while it's fresh to look at what worked and what didn't, and let's make some changes that we felt were informed by the situation that we had navigated.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't like a burning desire to get this done. There was no, we got to get this fixed, we're going to be in trouble. It was nothing like that. It was just us closing the loop on that litigation and trying not to forget those lessons that we learned along the way.
Other questions? I have a few. Chief, would you mind coming up? And I want to ask you a question. I got in late last night for my trip, and I didn't get a chance to review the red line copy, but in the second paragraph of the city attorney, well, you co-signed the staff report, so the second sentence, after the police chief documents a pattern, the city sends notice and can seek court orders that include closing the property, blah, blah, blah. And as one who has asked you for documentation on various criminal behaviors, et cetera, could you describe the documentation process that takes place?
Of course,
Yeah.
5.12 of the city code is rarely exercised. And as we get here today, and also partially to answer Councilman Richardson's question, we were really looking at best practices, what went well and what could have been better in the code. And so to initiate this process, this process of abatement for a nuisance within the community, we look at our records and our reports as we did in the last time that we did this. And we wanted to, throughout this refresh of 5.12, more closely define what is a qualifying event and at what level of proof. So is it just a report? Is it a citation? Is it an arrest? And does that need to be a conviction? So some of these things were not clearly defined previously. And so we made the effort to more clearly define those so we have a better predictable and usable ordinance going forward into the future.
Okay, thank you. Does it matter that, and this is probably more for Jonathan, that a violator leases a property from a landlord as far as closing the property is concerned?
Does it matter?
Yeah.
In what sense does it matter?
Well, when you close a business, for example,
Yeah.
a private business, and that private business leases the property from a landlord, the landlord is being penalized as well.
Right.
So
yeah, in that sense, yeah, of course. And we have some provisions in this ordinance that are hopefully intended to get that property into compliance well before there's any closures, right? The property should only really be closed in very egregious situations where there are countless off-ramps. There is a long process involved with the police chief and the city, and it's very reasonable standards. That is literally the standard. It's whether it's reasonable. And if a property were to proceed all the way to the point of closure, there has been a significant failure of oversight for that property's management, and absentee landlords need to be more responsible in those situations. And so I think actions have consequences is certainly the motto that a lot of cities have taken, or that's the approach they've taken. Actions have consequences, but there are plenty of opportunities to get out of that before it gets there. But yes, to answer your question, yeah, that would be a problem for a landlord. They should have better control, and arguably they should have the most control over their tenants. They have a lease.
I think one of the sections that has a good example of this is providing notice to the leasee and the property owner.
Right. We want to keep them in the loop.
Required as part of the process.
is that new?
I believe so,
Oh,
actually.
okay,
I think
good.
it is new.
Yeah.
And I'll find that for you here in just
That's
a minute.
no, I trust you. I'm very satisfied with that answer.
Sure.
I'm glad you consulted with the district attorney on item number 4, the safe harbor paragraph. Did the district attorney have a chance to review the other 8 changes?
Yeah, no, yes, she actually she reviewed the entire ordinance, and in it, the only change that she wanted me to pass on, and if I agreed with it, and I certainly do, is to revise that section 5.12.030, consistent with what I mentioned at the beginning during the staff report. But other than that, in making that change, she would support council's adoption of this ordinance.
Great. Just finally, a comment from me is that on the last page, the first paragraph, there's the second sentence starts, the proposed changes, I'm paraphrasing here, create more options than, quote, do nothing or close it. I think that's a great feature of this ordinance that perhaps we didn't emphasize enough. So. Okay.
I mentioned at the end of my staff report that
Hmm.
I'm going to volunteer staff for this. Staff's happy to track outcomes and return to council 12 months and see how we are. And if there's something that's deficient or otherwise needs to be amended to better support the city's the city, period. I'm happy to come back in 12 months and give a report on this either way.
And Jonathan, just one more thing as a information for the council. There's nothing that we're aiming towards or angling for. This is all just for the betterment of the city code. And there is nothing coming down the pipeline that we intend to or think we will wind up applying this new ordinance to. It's purely for improvement of the city code.
Right.
Well, and I think the fact we haven't done anything with this for 27 years speaks for itself. So, okay. Thank you, guys. With that, I'll entertain any comments from the people in the audience. Please raise your hand and step forward. Anybody?
My name is Karen Murray. I'm a resident of the Dalles, 2645 East 11th Street. And the question I have is, how do you tie the violator to the property in a fair way? I'll leave it at that.
Well, I'm not going to speak for the city attorney, but I like to think that our police department and our city staff applies fairness to any time that they perceive there may or may not be any violations of peace in the community and safety.
But Pentland's situation, the violator was across the street and St. Vincent de Paul got penalized. Why isn't the violator the one that incurs more? It was really heavy duty when St. Vincent de Paul was closed down. And the guy across the street and all the things that were related to that were put back on St. Vincent de Paul. And I just, the 300 feet from the boundary, does that mean if somebody's under the overpass, they're going to charge Lewis and Clark Festival Park? I mean,
Yeah.
you look at the 300 feet and it's like, it's kind of a rhetorical question a little bit, but I think we as a city need to look at what we need in terms of shelter for people on the street that are making these violations. And how are we going to get them the help they need? Is it a roof over their head so they can get their act together and get the wraparound services? How are we going to help them? And I just think penalizing a resource that they might use and penalizing all the people related to that, because I don't know. I think you have a pretty good idea on how hard it was on Bread and Blessings to do what they felt they needed to do when St. Vincent de Paul was closed. And I don't even have the answer to all that, but I think we have to look at the bottom line, and it's the people on the street that are causing the nuisance. In some respects, that's one of the examples. It's not the only thing. And how do we help them? What do we do?
So-
And I know we have some experts. I'm not an expert. I did try to teach 8th grade, and that helped me a lot, but
I don't think this ordinance is aimed specifically at anybody on Pentland Street, and I don't think it's aimed specifically at anybody on Union. It's an ordinance that needs to be passed because it's 27 years overdue, and it applies to a whole gamut of what might be construed as being a, quote, nuisance, end quote.
Why does it have the 300 feet there?
Yeah. So I can weigh in on some of these questions. So I think you're asking really.
I think we're getting outside the scope of what this is about, but go ahead.
I can see how, I think you're right. It is outside the scope, but I think I can see totally how you got there. So in the interest of let's just give you the answers I think you're hoping for, which are just answers. and I'll give you my opinion. You say, and you said earlier, you said a lot, and I don't want to mischaracterize it. And you said earlier, like, there's people on the streets causing the nuisance. The people on the streets in this example that you've given, they're committing crimes. The nuisance occurs when guests of a property who are coming to a property as business invitees or otherwise, they're patrons of a property. The property itself becomes a nuisance when it becomes like an attraction for people to commit crimes around. The 300-foot barrier is very common in American cities for this kind of an ordinance, a nuisance ordinance, because that seems to be the distance that you can really mark, and you don't lose sight of the cause for the crimes that are happening. Or it's not that these people that are committing these crimes aren't a nuisance in the everyday language that we use to describe nuisances. It's like, oh, that's a nuisance. Yes. But in the legal sense, the existence of this place that's attracting people to commit crimes within 300 feet of it, that is the nuisance the city is hoping to regulate to protect the public health, safety, welfare by, in the case of St. Vincent de Paul, the basis of that lawsuit was that not that they were providing services and that the city wasn't concerned with the fact that they were providing services, but it was the way that those services were being provided. They could have done all of the things that they were doing differently, and the city wouldn't have considered them to be a nuisance. But the way that the ordinance is drafted is that they have to show us that the way that they're intending on operating and running this business, this is America. They can run their business how they want to run their business, except when the way that they run their business interferes with your neighbors and your rights of the people that live there. And that's an idea to sort of illustrate the point.
But if we had sheltered services that could address what that guy, woman, whatever, whoever it was, needed, remove them because it was against the law or a public nuisance, get them the help. Don't let it go on and on and on and on and on. I don't know how long it went on, but too long for sure. It just doesn't make sense that St. Vincent de Paul, who's doing, and it wasn't, it was probably community meals and bread and blessings. It was probably a combination. And so I don't know. It doesn't seem right to me.
Under the new ordinance, if that were to happen again, let's just pretend we were 5 years ago and we had this ordinance in place at that time, the city could have requested the closure of some services of the property, and we wouldn't have had to have our hands tied to the whole property.
Yeah. Well, I heard
So
that.
that's one change in this to be more targeted.
Yeah.
So I hear that.
Right.
And I think it's resonating. Yeah.
Why not address what that person needs?
Well, this ordinance is a general ordinance. It applies in a whole bunch of situations, and it really has nothing to do with homelessness or the situations on Pentland Street.
And maybe it just brings up a point that we do really, really need that service of helping people that are on the street, being a public nuisance. You'd think they'd know better, and they don't have a roof over their head to be able to get their act together. And they can't, the 4-month waiting period at not the Gloria Center, the annex. I mean, it's really a difficult situation.
I think one of the comments I wanted to add is there's not a silver bullet. It's a very challenged and complicated, multifaceted dynamic.
Definitely.
And I don't think it's a matter of this or that. I think it's more of this and that. And there's a balance here to be created between the services that we can support, partner with other agencies, and provide to help individuals, and other tools that a city needs to have to mitigate some of the impacts while those efforts are underway. And so it's not a matter of or, it's a matter of and for me. And having this tool, not only in the example that we're talking about, but in a wide variety of other situations, having it on the books, ready, reviewed through the experience that we just had, and fair and balanced is why we brought this back tonight and why we wanted to have this conversation and have this in place.
Down the road, are we looking at trying to provide that population some resources? That's my question, maybe.
We have numerous nonprofit organizations in this community, numerous, okay, that are in the business of providing food, providing shelters, providing all kinds of mental health services, et cetera. Okay. And to come to a city council meeting and, I mean, we're one organization, and I'll just leave it at that. This ordinance is not meant to target anybody, period. Okay. It's 27 years overdue, and you raised some good questions, but this isn't the questions and the
I guess the 300 feet. That's the
300
part that
feet is
really bothers
absolutely
me.
necessary. Absolutely necessary.
I think a big piece of the ordinance is you have to have some element of a criteria to identify a certain proximity with nuisance, supposed nuisance. And 300 feet is something that is used in many other cities. It's been on our books for quite some time.
Yeah.
And when a city receives, these three or more instances in a 6 months period, and it goes to the police chief, who will then notice the property owner. The police chief is also required to provide additional narrative with that letter explaining why these instances within that 300-foot boundary are related or attributable to that particular business. I'm thinking of a city block in our downtown, for example, where you have multiple different businesses all within 25, 50 feet from one another.
Right.
That 300 foot is kind of your first test. And then there's work that staff will do to review that complaint, that citation, that arrest, and connect it to the businesses that are contributing through their activity to the cause of that nuisance. And so it's not simply just a matter of within 300 feet and it's assigned to a business. There's additional work that needs to be done there, especially in like a downtown core where businesses are so close to each other.
I think you can make a case to make it 600 feet. That's my opinion.
I think it's coming back to the organization that bothers me most.
Yeah, well, if
not
there's
so much
private
the
businesses
distance.
are at least as affected. We've had situations in the past where private business has created a nuisance, and our police department, through a series of documentation, has addressed those concerns that are of neighbors and situation. And like I said, we've had other instances, whether it's planning and zoning issues, transient lodging issues. I think you can make a case for 600 feet. That's my personal opinion. So with that, any other?
I was just going to add, I felt the same way when I heard the 300, but then I got looking at the original one and the redlining. 300 was in the original one, so for 27 years or whatever. And anyway, so that's not a change. What I do like in this is one phone call to 911 or anybody else is not going to cause this to come into play. Now we've clearly addressed it'll be a pattern of behavior. So there'll be a number of things that the police, city manager, whatever, will look at, not just one phone call is going to, start this rolling. And that's an improvement. So I think he's done a pretty good job of making some additions that really didn't have any definition before, and it's been that way for 27 years.
So there have been some good additions that were made.
I can think of a lot of things in our community where things could have triggered this, and it's not about any one thing at all.
Well, and remember when you went over the last big ordinance and you said, okay, we're not going to make a decision tonight. We're going to wait for 2 weeks and give everybody a chance to understand what's going on. I would like to ask that you wait to vote on this and give the nonprofits and organizations a chance to understand it, because your explanation, Mr. Kara, did help. I still have some misgivings a little bit, but it's the punitive approach that I heard, and I may have just zoomed in on it because of the situation. So
I don't
anyway,
I don't want to sound, Mr. Mayor, I just want to mention, I don't want to sound like I've had my head in the sand, but I honestly, I don't see how any of this really, I was surprised to see all of you in the crowd tonight. I don't think anybody in the city was intending this ordinance to impact the lives of the groups that you just mentioned. I was surprised to see you all here, and I'm happy to have further civic engagement.
I think it was at 300 feet.
I see.
I mean, I'm not trying to make light of it, but
Yeah.
Okay.
You're going to say something?
I take your point, and yet without sort of going beyond what I feel like I'm not quite clear what would be appropriate to talk about with that previous example. But I will say, without a punitive measure, we had no leverage. Without some sort of punitive measure, without some sort of ordinance on the books, we had no real leverage to have a conversation with. And what seemed like, just speaking for myself, in my opinion, was a conversation that was going nowhere, and really we felt needed to continue and be taken seriously. And yet, at the time, the ordinance that we had, or the law in the book, was pretty unwieldy. Didn't really allow us to fine tune and be both effective but also fair. And so I do feel like the city has had several examples of properties or businesses that have created problems for neighbors. We spent a long time and a lot of effort going through our short-term rental ordinance this last couple of years, specifically for that. So for like party houses and things like that. So
Sounds like keeping the lines of communication open, that's been improved with
hope so.
all your
Hope so.
new ordinance.
Uh,
Still like you to wait 2 weeks. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'm Tracy Regi Zeman, and I live here in the Dalles, Oregon. First, I'd like to say that Tim did show us places. They're not suitable because we serve so many people in homes. We don't serve just the houseless. And the places way out on Frontage Road, they would not be able to get there. We only serve 1 hour. And, that means you would have to have a bus that picked them up at a certain place, got them there, and then taking them back home. Because my pickup is full of food and tables and whatever. So that's not a possibility. Also, I have a passenger, and that's all the room I have. This idea that and I call it blaming the nonprofit for people's actions. Most of these people are adults. They're not children. And I believe that if whomever sees some kind of action that is inappropriate, then go and talk to the person that is doing the inappropriate action. I saw on that with St. Vincent de Paul, because I cooked there and served there, I saw the lawsuit, and some of the cases were all the way from St. Vincent de Paul all the way to the post office. Now, what in the heck would St. Vincent de Paul have to do with the post office and people violating whatever they did there? That doesn't make any sense. To me, it doesn't even make any sense, because when they were on Pentland Street, they were on public property. These people that are actually homeless, they are smart. They know what the law is, and the law stated if you're on public property and you're not doing anything other than being on public property, then what can you do? It's public property. And there's no shelter in the Dalles. And so you have a federal law that says you cannot arrest them. You already went through a lawsuit. I remember I was asked to be part of it, and I said, no, I'm not going to be part of it. But you went through a lawsuit already. Parker remembers it. I remember it. So what you're saying is that St. Vincent de Paul has a duty to try to get these people out of there. These people are saying, no, we know what our rights are. Then why is it that the city doesn't, if they don't like what a person is doing, they take, either get the police chief out there or some of his workers and tell them, listen, we are the authority and you will move. St. Vincent de Paul, Bread and Blessings, and Community Mills had no authority, and they knew that. And that's why they didn't move. Now, I don't know exactly how you got them to move, but I noticed just last week, some of them were back.
They moved because St. Vincent de Paul was not serving food anymore. That's why they moved. And let me just finish. Okay. We had 1,500 police calls there in 1 year. Okay. We had a neighborhood that was severely affected on 3 sides by the 1,500 police calls and that. I'm not surprised that those activities bled over near the post office at all. That's why I would support a 600-foot radius. But the effect on Pentland Street was had a far-reaching effect on a large part of the city, not just 300 feet, including probably the post office. So
we served there since 96, January of 97. Never did anyone ever sleep on that street. Over 28 years. Never.
But some conditions changed. Something changed, Teresa, right?
What happened? What did change?
Yeah.
Well, someone decided to do an afternoon meal. We only did morning meals. They started doing an afternoon meal. Of course, the people are not going to leave. They're going to want the afternoon meal. And the afternoon meal, part of the meal went out, what I call the rock pile, or, the little pallet house.
2 things that happened was the Boise case in 2019, and the other thing was House Bill 3115 that was passed by the Oregon State Legislature. Are you familiar with that? Those are 2 things that changed that Councilor Richardson makes a great point. This isn't the 1997 anymore. Okay, a lot of things have changed since then. And another big thing that changed is 1,500 police calls. And Union Street has experienced 254 police calls.
I think it's also important.
You're saying that you're blaming St. Vincent de Paul for these police calls.
No,
That's what I'm hearing you say.
I don't want
because you made you wouldn't have done the lawsuit against them if you weren't blaming them.
Right.
You were blaming them.
I think it's important, Mr. Mayor. I think it's important just to, because I didn't mention this at all because this is not something that I've proposed to change in the ordinance. So our ordinance currently says, and if council adopts this ordinance update, it will continue to say that there's a defense available for St. Vincent de Paul. They had this defense available to them if they wanted to assert it, and it would be available to anybody else if the city were to pursue this. And there's actually 2 defenses. The first is that the person in charge couldn't, in the exercise of their reasonable diligence, determine that this was happening. So they just didn't know, and they shouldn't. They either they didn't know or they shouldn't have not known. And number 2, the other defense is that even though they knew, they couldn't do anything to stop it. And so the issue, just to talk about St. Vincent de Paul, but you can think about this broadly, is that the city's position is that St. Vincent de Paul could have, what they were doing in that case wasn't reasonable. They were offering these services recklessly. They didn't do it in a thoughtful way that would be managing the impacts of the provision of those services on the community, their neighbors. You should have been at some of those city council meetings when there was not a seat in this room. It was filled with the neighbors on Pentland Street demanding that the city do something because they have they've lost their community on Pentland Street. And so the city's position was, and it still is, I think, that St. Vincent de Paul's operations, they were done not using best practices, and that the impacts associated with that provision of service in that way led to the nuisance. But if somebody can show under this ordinance, it's not being changed, that they either didn't know that something was happening, that's a defense. We're not going to hold you responsible if you don't know.
The people couldn't listen to them. St. Vincent de Paul's not the authority.
Yeah. That's not right.
They're not the authority,
Yeah.
so they couldn't go and move those people off.
Sure.
You have to be an authority to move people off.
They could have changed a lot of things that would have made it better and not allowed the city to file the suit in the first place.
So I'd like to add a clarifying
Tell me,
here.
like, what would those be in?
Well, why don't you get a copy of the nuisance complaint itself, and it lists them all there, and it lists recommendations that our police chief made to them to rectify. Let me finish. To rectify the situation, and obviously that didn't happen. Okay, so Mr. Cleaves, go ahead.
I think there's an important element here to call out that, you know, there are individuals in our community who don't have a place to go. They don't have a house, and simply being on the sidewalk is not a qualifying incident in this ordinance. If you don't have a place to go and you need to rest on the sidewalk or in a public place, that's not a qualifying incident. And so the list here, which I'll read just a few of these, is really what we're focused on, is the repeat incident of some of these qualifying incidents that are within a 300-foot radius that are impacting a neighborhood. And a sample of the list includes assault, burglary, concealed weapon, criminal mischief, discharge of a weapon, disorderly conduct, drinking in public places, menacing, offensive littering, outdoor burning. It's not simply just being on the sidewalk, because it's a public place. We have a right to be on that public place. But these incidents are what qualify and contribute to that public nuisance. And when these happen day after day after day, repeated in a community, it impacts neighboring businesses, neighboring residents, and that's what we're looking to have a tool to work with that business owner or that property owner to stop them from recurring in a repeat manner.
How does St. Vincent de Paul or even Bread and Blessings have the authority to tell people when they know that it's their right to be on public land?
Yeah.
You're not telling them,
that?
you're not telling them to move. You don't have to tell them that's not your job. You don't have to tell them to move.
And why didn't you go and get rid of the
because
on Pentland Street?
Did you hear the list he just read off?
I did.
Okay.
Did.
That's why.
Mr. Mayor, I just to respond. It wouldn't be, the city is not encouraging any citizens or nonprofits to take up arms as a law enforcement, vigilante program. Please call law enforcement if you have public safety emergencies. With that said, just to sort of, again, this is not about St. Vincent de Paul, but to sort of get the point home, St. Vincent de Paul was never in a position, we never expected them, nobody wanted them to call and start dealing with people getting off their sidewalk. That wasn't the issue. What would have been something that they could have done to help would have been to say to the people that are causing these problems, which is to say that are committing these crimes, to tell them, knock it off or no more food.
Every day I went out there.
Yeah.
Every day.
And you told them?
And told them.
And then what happened the next day when they came back?
They looked at me and they said, we have a right to be on public land. And that's what they said to me. We know what the law is.
Yeah.
And I went like,
that's not what, yeah.
That's not the
I told them every day I went out there.
Just like, don't commit crimes. Like, hey, don't hit that guy with that bat. If you hit that guy with that bat, we're just not going to give you any food.
Right. But that person wasn't hitting anybody. They were just sleeping on the sidewalk. That's all.
And that's not the problem.
Yeah, no issues with that.
But that became the problem. That it seemed to be the problem, one of the big problems. Well, and I know the police chief went and made a list and made a whole list of things that St. Vincent de Paul, their ministry, doesn't do. They don't do mental health. St. Vincent de Paul does electricity, water, showers, laundry. And if a person is burnt out of their home, they might give them a hotel or something. Or if they come out for surgery, they might give them a hotel. That's it. That's it. No mental health. They don't find them housing. Nothing like that. And that was on the list. And I looked at the list. I said, this is This is nowhere even near what St. Vincent de Paul does. I was of Ascension that one time before I did Bread and Blessings. Oh, I know. Now, Portland does. Portland has mental health. Look how big they have a whole lot of employees and they can bring people in. Not this one.
Mhm.
I just think that, I just think that sometimes I feel like you guys are being kind of hard on the nonprofits that are really trying to help. And a lawsuit is not really helpful.
No,
mean-
lawsuit's not, no, my turn. A lawsuit's not helpful. It was difficult to get there. It took years to get there, and it was dragged out much longer than it had to be. Now, you don't like that. I didn't like the fact that we had to do that. But also, I got to tell you, Teresa, I told you the truth last time. I appreciate your spirit and your work. And I think that some of the folks engaged in that work don't always wrestle with some of the impacts. We have to, because I went and sat down and talked to people who were assaulted, had windows broken, were fearful, had fires set. It was a lot of crime. It wasn't just there was a few homeless people. It was a lot of crime in one place because they came for the food and were not given any apparent structure or consequences for bad behavior.
How would you?
You know what? I'm not going to. I am not relitigating it with you. We will have a tool, and if somebody who runs a drug house or a nonprofit or a bar or anything else creates a condition of ongoing crime in a neighborhood, we're obligated to take action. That may mean conversation with people and say, let's work together on how to ameliorate this. But if we're told to go pound sand, the city is not going to say, well, okay, we're going to do what we can to ameliorate it. And this is one tool.
It's doing the behavior, not after the nonprofit that's trying to help them to get, to get their lives together.
Sometimes it has to be both.
I said this at the last meeting, and then I think we've gotten way beyond what the purpose of this ordinance is. And that is that, and I'll reiterate what Councilor Richardson has so eloquently said, and that is that the city has an obligation to get involved when even the best intentioned services and activities such as yours interfere with the general public's right to a safe and clean neighborhood and public right of way. So I thank you for what you do. I think I said this the last time. I appreciate all the work that you've done on this. But this ordinance is not aimed at you, and this ordinance is not aimed at St. Vincent de Paul, nor was the ordinance that we passed 2 meetings ago aimed at anybody in particular. These are very badly needed improvements to our municipal code, and we'll see how the council feels about it. So, is there any other
I have one
discussion?
one other
Mhm.
piece, Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind. Sorry, I'm trying to get back to my page here. I know that our current staff would certainly alert council appropriately if there was any action taken, but since we need to be looking to sort of future people and future conditions a little bit, I'd like to see about amending the ordinance, and I think it's probably best done on page 5, or that is page 81 of the packet, just to require the police chief to send notice to the city manager as well as to the city attorney, or perhaps city manager and council, as well as to the city attorney when he's taking action and sending copies of the notice out.
So, Councilor Richardson, Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
Just to confirm, you're looking at section on page 5 of the ordinance, section 5.12.050 B. I'm sorry, A2, somewhere here under service, where it says the police chief shall send copies of the nuisance notice to the city attorney's office.
Correct. And I'm happy to be shown a better place to amend, but I was thinking whatever that is, A to
Yeah,
C.
A to C. Okay, well, if that seems very sensible, and I can easily include a provision in there that indicates once it comes from the police chief to the city attorney's office, that the city attorney will communicate with the city manager and or convey this to the city manager and meet to inform council, or would you like council to be more informed than as needed on these?
I could see sending after the attorney to the city manager as the manager to know what's going on, to send another, that at that point is whether he comes forward and says the city council needs to look at this. We don't need to have the letter sent to us initially. That's up for our city manager to decide and bring it to council if you feel so inclined as the manager.
Sure.
So
Well, what
Ordinance, if you have that requirement that the notice is sent to the city attorney and the city manager and the city attorney
that should be enough right there.
for council. We currently, and I would expect future attorneys and city managers to
Yeah.
inform council
I
appropriately.
appreciate now that when we have a public, I'm at a loss for words, public nuisance process against an abatement against, house with fire hazards or what have you, garbage, whether it's by ordinance or by custom, all of those come to city council and we give people a chance to even show up and say their piece or what have you. But at least it involves the council in some amount of understanding of what action's being taken. And again, whether that's by ordinance or custom, I don't know.
you're talking about, like noxious vegetation.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's by ordinance as far as the abatement assessment, like the assessed cost of abatement when the city goes and does the work. And
right before that action is taken,
yeah,
the council, we actually have to put eyes on that and say, yes, go.
Before Nikki, for example, abates a property for noxious vegetation, you want the council to approve that Nikki would go on there and do that?
No, I'm saying that happens now, right? It's usually on the consent agenda and says, we're going to go
after Nikki abates it, for example, after the city abates it, spearheaded by Nikki,
right.
The bill needs to be imposed as a lien against the property if the property owner doesn't pay it.
Right.
And so the council's approval, when you see it on the consent agenda, is approving the cost of the abatement.
Right.
But on the following page, under 5.12.060, legal proceedings,
Yep.
once the nuisance is noticed and sent to the city attorney, city manager, property owner, et cetera, by the police chief, the city attorney then may commence legal proceedings. And in your practice, before we move forward with any kind of legal proceeding,
right,
we discuss with council.
Typically, council will authorize me. Yeah.
Fair point.
But I'm happy, honestly, if this concern that you're flagging, Councilor Richardson, can be alleviated just by changing C to notice or something, some heading, but basically it'll just read, for the record, I was thinking, Matthew, it would just say, the police chief shall send copies of the nuisance notice as well as any other documentation which supports legal proceedings against the property before or contemporaneously to the city attorney's office and the city manager's office for consideration.
I can live with that. Yeah,
that way we just cover all the bases.
Yes.
The only other suggestion I might have is 5.12060, right at the start of that opening paragraph. It says the city attorney may commence legal proceedings, just right prior to it. After consultation with city council, the city attorney may commence legal proceedings.
Oh yeah, that's fine too.
But we could do
either
both.
one,
We're getting there.
We could do both. So I guess my recommendation would be, Mr. Mayor, for council to make minor modifications to, then move to adopt general ordinance number 25-1420 as amended by title only, and reflecting the following changes for the record: revising TDMC 5.12.030B, consistent with my conversation with the district attorney's office, and it's on YouTube, so we can refer to that tomorrow when I draft this, if it gets adopted tonight, and reflecting Councilor Richardson's request, if that's the council's pleasure, on TDMC 5.12.050. I just had it. A2C, revising that heading no longer will be called the city attorney's office. It'll now be called police chief report. And it will read, the police chief shall send copies of the nuisance notice, ... And in addition to the city attorney's office, it'll say the city manager's office. And a final modification to 5.12.060 before A, indicating before the city attorney may commence legal proceedings, right before that, inserting the phrase after specific city council authorization, comma, the city attorney may commence, and then leave the rest of it. And that would be my recommendation.
I appreciate that may be overkill, but I do feel it's important to memorialize our intent and instruction on this matter. Closing, seizing, or otherwise interfering with private property in a significant way should be it should be taken seriously. I think we do, or will, or would. But I feel it's worth putting into black and white in this matter.
You bet.
Well, I guess a motion is in order. However, I'm a little confused about what the motion should say. I mean, we're not going to put all what you just recited.
You would just make the motion as I mentioned. The exact language is on page of your
76.
Page 76 of your staff report.
2.
Yeah, it would be option 2, minor modifications as amended by title only, and the motion can just say as amended by the city attorney during tonight's staff report.
Okay, is there such a motion?
I can try. I move to adopt General Ordinance number 25-1420 as amended with option 2 by city attorney as presented by title only. Is that sufficient? I said as amended by title only.
I think the record will reflect the council's intent with that motion if it's seconded and voted on.
Good.
I'll second that.
It's been moved by Councilor Richardson, McLaughlin, and seconded by Councilor Richardson to pass the ordinance as amended. Is there anyone who would like to see or hear the ordinance read in its entirety?
No.
Will the city clerk please read the ordinance by title only?
General Ordinance number 25-1420, an ordinance amending the Dalles Municipal Code, Chapter 5.12, Public Nuisances.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council.
Okay, item 10A, Mr. Klebs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Included in your packet is a progress update on the City Council Goal and Action Plan. I wanted to give this third update ahead of our goal setting retreat, which is scheduled for a full day on Thursday, November 6th, with a morning half day the following day, Friday, November 7th. This is a report that you've seen prior. And I'm not going to go over each of the different updates and their actions, but kind of give you a snapshot summary of some of the ones that jumped off the page to me the most. And then I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So starting on page 96, our first goal, goal 1.2 on the Federal Street Plaza. The design documents for this project have been drafted and are being reviewed by staff to be finalized. The next step is to create the construction documents and move forward with putting that project out to bid for construction next year. Goal action 1.3, the CAD RMS project. This project is moving forward and proceeding with data collection and in the planning phase. This is a project that's going to take the bulk of the year to get to the official starting point where we'll really be able to use that software. And so the chief is engaged closely with our partners in rolling that project forward. Goal 1.7 deals with a review and update of our animal control ordinances. We've completed the livestock ordinance update and the dog ordinance likely as an action, but also open to discussion depending on the council's direction at the next council meeting. Moving forward on to page 98. We have goal 3.2 that I wanted to highlight recently. The community outreach team traveled to DC and had a stronger focus on policy needs of our partner agencies and the city itself versus project needs, given the federal environment that we're currently in. And one of the highlights there for the city specifically was continued meetings with Congressman Bentz to work and carry through on the Dalles Watershed Act. Goal 3.4, which looks to nuisance reports, similar to the conversation we just had. But this had a focus on the mobile food vendor and transient merchant ordinance passed at the last city council meeting, and tonight's discussion on the pattern of behavior ordinance. Looking on page 99, goal 4.2, at an upcoming council meeting, most likely at the tail end of November, we'll have some continued discussion around the city's ever-evolving local agency and nonprofit granting program. This is a substantial portion of the city council's budget, and we've seen a lot of change and evolution through that process and how we field and vet and ultimately make decisions on outside funding requests of our partner agencies and local nonprofits. So that's going to be coming up at the tail end of November. On page 100, goal 5.2, this deals with different revenue streams to support our master plan projects. Typically every year in January, we do a review and update and try and make small but consistent adjustments to our fee schedule, consistent with council policy around the use of new Google revenue to support some of our master plans, and ultimately mitigating rate increases to our water and sewer rates. Those rates still need to be adjusted and increased. Not as much because of the council's direction and decisions and how we are going to be using our Google revenue from the 2 new data centers. And so we will see, again, water and wastewater rate increases in January, but it's not as much as would be otherwise. Goal 5.4, which deals with the 6th Street Bridge. Staff is still working on a feasibility study to come back to the council for award to allow that project to go forward. Goal 5.5. This is an interesting one. Well, they're all interesting, but this one's interesting in a couple different ways. On page 100, and it deals with evaluating city-related improvements required from developers for commercial, residential, or industrial projects. So we stay in alignment with our master plans and the community's evolving needs. There's a lot of history and work to be done in this area, and staff has begun that work. Our current policies, which have been shaped by prior councils and by the state itself in some instances, limit the city's ability to require improvements with development, such as sidewalks and other street upgrades, notably in residential development. And this shifts some of the costs to taxpayers, has created infrastructure gaps, and in some cases discouraged the development of multi-unit housing in favor of smaller projects that don't hit some of these triggers that require, existing triggers that require development. And so we'll need to continue having these conversations and look at the different tools that we may want to use that have been used in years past, such as increasing those requirements, looking at local improvement districts, neighboring communities, even smaller than the Dalles. They typically require sidewalks and related improvements with residential development. And so we'll need your support, and we'll talk about this more at the goal setting session, of course, to make sure that we are meeting these essential infrastructure needs and that we are maintaining them as well. And then finally, on the last page, page 101, action 6.1, we have several new web pages that we've talked about a number of times about providing information about the Google data centers, about the tax abatement agreement that we have with them, and council's policy direction on how to use, budgetary policy direction on how to use those different revenue streams. We have new web pages about multiple upcoming projects in the downtown area, and we've been, notably our city clerk has been pushing that out on several different platforms. We have, I was about to say new, but it is 1 year old, what's happening at City Hall video segment that we post on Facebook and Instagram. It'd be really, really great to like and share that, much to my dismay, because I'm frequently highlighted in it. And there's also a community survey out this year, which is soliciting some additional input in preparation for our goal setting session in November. So that's a new additional effort that we are doing this year. Goal 6.2, the digitization project is complete, and we are working through the product from that project and making it accessible and usable. Goal 6.4, the local government academy is underway, and the graduation will be at the next city council, I believe. And Amy, how many do we have this year? We have 11 participants, which is a really great number.
Sorry, Matthew, is that underway or I've lost track?
In
of what-
progress.
It's in progress. Yes. Thank you.
That end. Did
They
you-
just finished.
Yep.
Why aren't they here? They should be
They're coming. They're coming.
coming to city council.
They're coming to city council. Don't worry.
All right. All right.
And then the last highlight is goal 6.6, which deals with the branding update. We have a cross-functional team that's been working on that, and they have some updated draft logos that they are working on and other branding material that we'll be talking at the overall leadership team and are excited to bring before council. So as I said with that, I didn't want to read what was included in your packet too. But those were some of the highlights I wanted to go over, but I'm happy to answer any questions on anything in your packet.
Any questions for Mr. Klebs? Just a comment. I'm especially happy with the last page of the goals, some of the things that we've been achieving with our website and disseminating, is that a word?
Yes. Disseminating.
Information out to the community. So Amy and Matthew, you guys deserve a lot of credit for all the improvements we're seeing in that regard.
And I would extend that to much of the city staff who provide some of the subject matter expertise from the planning department, urban renewal, public works. They do a great job, and it's a team effort to pull all that together.
Good work, guys.
I have a thought or two, just perhaps for us all to chew on. I don't have great wisdom on this necessarily, but just a couple of quick thoughts. So we have 33 goals, if my math's correct, which seems like rather a lot for a one-year plan. I am glad for us to sort of reach big or reach far, but I also want to be mindful that we don't sort of burn out staff trying to get them to take on more than they can sustainably do. So it might be something to think about. Maybe we need to limit the number of goals to some degree, or at least be mindful of that 33. Again, seems like possibly it's a lot. That said, we could tighten up a little bit here and there, because we still have a few goals that are really what might be called like process or procedure or just custom. Maybe we don't need to put that as a goal for something we're going to do anyway. Like that's the way business is. Great. Goals should be
we use the parking lot.
that would be a great place to have an airplane hangar or a parking lot or the marina or something where we could. I don't know. Let's see. One of the goals is, what is it? To have a 10% contingency fund and end with a 4-month balance at the end of the fiscal year. That's great. We do that. We don't need to clog up our list of goals with something we're going to do anyway. It's like provide good service. Yes.
I think that's excellent feedback. And when you look at the update and anticipated next steps sections of this report, when you see completed and ongoing, I think that's kind of a flag for that very dynamic. And I think, over the last few years, we've really been working on our goal setting session. First time kind of on a kind of whiteboard, Trello board, where we were moving things between high priority and low priority. More recently, with the assistance of Sarah Singer Wilson, we've been kind of crafting our goal statements and what these different actions look like, but focused on a year timeline. And it's one of the things I'm looking forward to at this upcoming goal session, and why it's a little bit longer is because we're looking at that 3 to 5 year time horizon. And one of the conversation points we've been having is, we can load up 5 years too, but how are we identifying and communicating and looking at these different actions and what priority they may have? If you're looking at, low hanging fruit, high process cost, but high reward, low process card and, low reward? Is there a timeline deadline for this? What are those different things to take into consideration? And what I've said a couple of times is, okay, it's Friday afternoon, there's 2 hours left in the day. What do we allocate that time to? And what are some of those metrics and what's part of that plan? And so I'm hoping we get more of that at the goal setting session in November.
Councilor Runyon?
Just to follow up on what Dan was saying or what I was getting out of it, maybe I misinterpreted, but I see about 18, maybe more, that are still in progress. So we got 18 to start us off, right? So how many more are you going to add to that? Are we going to get 35, 40 altogether? I mean, I think we need to be cognizant of staff time too, and so many areas, and some of these can be combined probably into one area possibly. I don't know.
And that's part of the reason we moved this goal setting session traditionally now, I guess you could say, into November, because there's an unending amount of work to be done. And we want to make sure that we're setting some time aside, staff and city council, to make sure we're talking about which ones to prioritize, because we can't get to them all. If everything's a priority, nothing is, those kind of dynamics.
Yeah.
We certainly, and all of the city staff put in a lot of time and effort, and they work very hard. And we don't want to burn people out. And so
Some of these are ongoing things that are already kind of in progress. They don't need to be on a new goal list because they're already part of your process.
Filled if we take them off too.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, anybody else? Promise?
3 minutes.
So I'm Judy Merrill. I live here in the Dalles. And or Council McLaughlin, I'd really like to thank you for taking the time to check out 5 places. And I was looking forward to hearing about 5 places. I'd just like to make a list of them. Can you hear me? Is this thing on?
Yeah, you can take as long as you're thanking people, you can take all the time you want.
Okay. No, this is all positive.
Oh.
I just wanted to hear.
I thought.
No, I just wanted to make a list of the 5 places because you were hoping that maybe.
Have it published. I'll get you a copy.
Yeah, maybe you could get together after the meeting on that.
Yep.
Great. And I really want to thank you for doing that. And I really want to thank all the council members for doing what you do. I mean, it's just amazing to me. And plus, I wanted to extend an invitation. I haven't gone to it yet, and it's going to happen this on November 6th at the Granada, and it's a free community screening. It's called No Place to Grow Old, and it's a documentary capturing a growing crisis unfolding quietly across America, older adults aging into homelessness. It's 6:30 p.m. to the end, and there's a free dinner, discussion, and the film, and that's at the Granada.
What time is the housing summit on that same day? Oh, good. Okay. Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, that's our strategic planning goal setting day,
Is it?
I think.
Yes.
Okay.
You.
Mayor
Okay.
Mays.
Thank you.
Judy.
Mayor Mays.
Council McLaughlin?
Since we're doing shout outs, I attended an event at Granada. It was a movie and food, and there were over 200 people there at this event on a Saturday. And it was our library working with the Granada, and they're doing events like this in multiples. Things like this keeps our kids, our youth engaged in our community, and we just need to recognize when things are going well in our community. We need to recognize that. And thanks to Chuck Gomez and his wife, Deborah, for partnering with entities in our community. And I just wanted to bring that up. It's a shout out.
Thank you. Anything else? Good. This meeting is hereby adjourned.